The sons of Xylos Prime were a dull, bloodshot smear across a sky choked with ash and the metallic taste of ancient dust. For the Kalarok kinpack, newly arrived from the verdant, life-rich worlds further within the Tau Viorla Sept's expansion sphere, the planet was an affront. A shattered husk, pockmarked with craters that bled geothermal vapors, its surface a fractured mosaic of crystalline rock and pulverized regolith. There was no life, not as the Kroot understood it. No thrumming biomass, no vibrant flora, no swift-running prey to chase across its barren plains. It was a dead world, claimed by the Tau Empire for its strategic location and rumored mineral wealth, a claim that struck the Kroot as a waste of good galactic real estate. Shaper Kellerok, his quills twitching with a mixture of professional diligence and an underlying sense of unease, surveyed the desolation from atop a spire of obsidian dark rock. His ancestors would have shunned such a place, seeing it as an empty larder. Yet his kinpack had long served the Tau, an alliance forged in desperation and maintained by the cold calculus of survival. The Firecast commanders respected the Kroot's brutal efficiency in close-quarters combat, their unmatched tracking skills, and their unnerving adaptability. In return, the Kroot received advanced weaponry, protection, and access to new worlds brimming with novel gene code to consume and assimilate. Xylos Prime, however, offered little beyond mineral ore and the bitter wind. Their mission, assigned by Commander Brightblade of the Air Caste, was simple: pacify any residual fauna, an amusing euphemism on a world this lifeless, and conduct preliminary resource surveys. It was a task usually relegated to automated drones or less experienced Kroot. But Brightblade, with his characteristic thoroughness, had assigned one of the most respected packs to ensure absolute compliance. Kalarok knew it was a test, a measure of their loyalty and discipline, and the Kalarok kinpack would not be found wanting. Weeks turned into months. The Kroot moved with their characteristic loping gait across the ravaged landscape, their experienced trackers identifying subterranean fissures and anomalous energy readings. They encountered no indigenous life, no beast to bring down and consume. The frustration mounted, a low, grumbling hunger in their collective gut. Kroot biology demanded a constant influx of new genetic material, a culinary imperative that drove their entire species. To go without was to stagnate, to weaken. Their quills, normally vibrant and stiff, seemed to lose a fraction of their luster. Their skin, usually a healthy, mottled green, appeared duller. Then the tremors began. Not seismic activity, for Xylos Prime was geologically stable, but subtle, resonant vibrations that emanated from deep beneath the crust. The TOE Earth-cast engineers dismissed them as micro-stress fractures in the planet's mantle, a geological peculiarity. But Caloroc's gut instincts, honed over centuries of hunting and survival, screamed otherwise. There was something else down there, something vast and unnatural. Following the tremors, his most skilled trackers, Kavarna and Xiur, reported anomalous excavations. Not Tau-made boreholes, but ancient, precise shafts that spiraled into the planet's depths, choked with millennia of fallen dust. They were too geometrically perfect, too alien in their construction to be natural. Brightblade, busy with orbital mapping, granted Caloroc permission to investigate, assuming it was a defunct mining operation from an unknown Xenos race. Just ensure it poses no threat to Tau expansion, the commander had transmitted, his tone clipped and efficient. Deep within one of these excavated shafts, Caloroc's pack found it. Not a mine, but a tomb. And not a tomb in the conventional sense, but a sprawling, subterranean complex of impossibly smooth, obsidian-dark halls. There were no murals, no relics, no inscriptions. Just vast, echoing chambers leading to more chambers, a labyrinth of death and silence. The air was dry, utterly sterile, devoid of even the faintest microbial life. It smelled of ozone and cold, unyielding metal. Within these halls, amidst the rubble of a catastrophic, forgotten conflict, they found the remnants. Skeletal forms, not bone, but a strange, living metal, shattered and inert. These were the husks of ancient warriors, their limbs snapped, their torsos rent, their vacant eye sockets staring into an eternity of blackness. Scattered amongst them were smaller, insectoid constructs, equally inert, resembling scarabs fashioned from polished obsidian and arcane alloys. Some were intact. Others crumbled into dust at the slightest touch. Caloroc knelt beside one of the skeletal forms, its metallic hand frozen in a gesture of eternal defense. He ran a clawed finger over its surface. It was cold, unnervingly smooth, and impossibly strong, despite its shattered state. His genetic instincts, normally screaming with the promise of new biomass, were muted, confused. This was not flesh. This was not bone. It was something entirely alien, unlike anything the Kroot had ever encountered. Xiur, ever the pragmatist, nudged a fallen scarab with the butt of his pulse rifle. It skittered across the floor, breaking into a shower of metallic dust and tiny, crystalline shards. No meat, Shaper. he grunted, disappointment heavy in his guttural voice. Nothing to gain here. But Caloroc's instincts, though muted, were persistent. There was something here. An ancient, dormant energy. A sense of unfathomable age. His Kroot lineage had consumed the genetic material of countless species across the galaxy, from the humble burrowing worms of Septatko to the hyper-aggressive megafauna of Urtan. They had assimilated everything, growing stronger, faster, tougher. This felt different. It was an absence of life, but a presence of something else. He picked up a larger fragment of one of the metallic skeletons, a shard from what might have been a rib cage. It was cool against his palm, almost vibrating with an imperceptible hum. He brought it close to his quills, scenting the faint, acrid tang of ozone and something akin to a dormant power source. His quills flared, a subconscious reaction. "There is something here," Calorok rasped, his voice low, resonating in the cavernous chamber. "A form of construction, but not simple metal. There is a complexity, an echo." He pondered for a moment, his black eyes narrowed in thought. The Kroot instinct was clear. If it could be consumed, it could be understood. If it could be understood, it could be assimilated. Against the grumbling objections of some of his kin, Calorok made a decision that would forever alter the fate of the Calorok kin pack, and perhaps ripple through the entire Toe Empire. "We consume," he commanded, his voice firm, resolute. "This is a new form of life, a new form of power. We must understand it, make it our own." Reluctantly, carefully, the Kroot began their unprecedented feast. They gathered the shattered remnants of the metallic warriors, the inert scarabs, the shimmering dust that clung to the ancient floors. They brought them to their temporary processing sites, rudimentary fires lit within the sterile Necron halls, the alien light dancing upon their mottled green skin. One by one, they consumed. The metallic fragments were strange to chew, utterly without succulence. They fractured with a brittle snap, leaving a gritty residue on their tongues. There was no flavor, no immediate surge of energy or sense of genetic assimilation. Just a cold, mineral taste that lingered. For Calorok, the first consumption was an unsettling experience. He crunched down on a fragment of a metallic leg bone. It was hard, resisting his powerful jaws before finally yielding. He felt a faint, almost imperceptible jolt, not of life, but of structure. A cold, alien imprint settling deep within his genetic memory. His quills twitched, not with pleasure, but with a strange, nascent awareness. He felt clearer, colder, more precise. The transformation began subtly, imperceptibly at first. The initial signs were not biological in the way Kroot understood it, but almost energetic. When the Kroot next encountered a rockfall, a dangerous, unexpected collapse of a crystalline tunnel, two of the Kroot, Kavarna, and Exir, found themselves reacting with an almost unnatural speed. They moved with a sudden, fluid grace, slipping through the cascading debris with minimal injury, as if their bodies were suddenly more durable, more resistant to blunt force. One Kroot, shaper in training Jaharok, stumbled and was struck by a falling slab of granite. Instead of the expected crushed bones, he merely staggered. A dull impact absorbed by an unnerving, transient shimmer that seemed to ripple across his skin. He stood, shaking his head, more bewildered than injured. Kalarok observed these incidents with a growing sense of awe and a deepening unease. This was not the rapid growth of muscle, or the development of a new gland, or the sharpening of senses. This was a fundamental alteration of their resilience, a change at a deeper, almost atomic level. His kin seemed to hum with a low, resonant energy, a silent vibration that only Kroot, with their heightened sensitivities, could perceive. As they continued to consume the inert remnants of Xylos Prime's ancient inhabitants, the changes became more pronounced. During rest cycles, Kalarok observed his kin's forms. Their normally supple, pliant skin began to take on a subtle, almost imperceptible metallic sheen, particularly around their quills and the tougher plates of their hide. Their bones felt denser, heavier, a noticeable weight gain that defied their efficient metabolism. Even their eyes, deep pools of black, seemed to hold a new, cold glint, reflecting the sterile, dead light of the ancient halls. There was also a change in their collective consciousness. The Kroot communicated through guttural clicks and chirps, but also through a subtle, subconscious exchange of genetic memories and sensory data. Now, a low, resonant hum began to permeate this collective link during periods of deep consumption. It was not a voice, but a feeling of profound ancientness, of unyielding purpose, of vast, indifferent intelligence. It was cold, logical, and utterly alien to the Kroot's primal, instinct-driven minds. Kalarok knew, with a certainty that chilled him to his core, that they had found something far more profound than mere mineral wealth. They had stumbled upon a silent, dormant power, and in their unyielding Kroot way, they were now attempting to ingest its very essence. The initial phase was over. The crucible had begun. The feasting continued, a slow, methodical ingestion of the ancient Necron dead. The Kalarok Kinpack had established hidden processing chambers deep within the labyrinthine tomb world, far from the prying eyes of Tau drones or inquisitive Earth-cast teams. Here, the sterile silence of the Necron halls was broken only by the rhythmic crunching of alien metal and the low, collective grunts of the Kroot. It was an unnatural repast, devoid of the usual thrill of the hunt or the succulent satisfaction of fresh kill, yet driven by an even more primal hunger, the imperative to evolve, to adapt, to survive. Shaper Kalarok watched his kin with a growing intensity, his own body undergoing the same subtle yet profound shifts. The metallic shards, once gritty and flavorless, now imparted a peculiar sensation. It wasn't taste in the Kroot sense, but a cold, informational download, a direct transfer of structural data into their very biology. His quills, once a soft, mottled green, now possessed an unnerving rigidity, almost like fine wires woven through hardened chitin. The skin on his forearms, normally pliable, felt strangely taut, denser, and under the flickering light of their makeshift fires, occasionally caught an iridescent gleam like oil on water, but of a dark, metallic hue. The first, undeniable biological alterations began to manifest more openly. The Kroot's already formidable resilience was magnified. Jaharok, the shaper in training, who had shrugged off a rockfall, found himself caught in the blast radius of a malfunctioning tow-sonic disruptor during a routine patrol. The force would have pulped a lesser auxiliary, but Jaharok merely crumpled, then rose, his hide smoking faintly where the energy had struck him. His internal organs, while momentarily jarred, remained intact. His fellow Kroot, witnessing this, exchanged grim, knowing glances. The Necron diet was granting them an unprecedented toughness. Metabolic efficiency soared. The Kroot, typically requiring frequent feeding to sustain their active lifestyles and rapid genetic assimilation, found themselves needing less sustenance from conventional sources. The Necron remnants seemed to fuel them directly, a sterile, sustained energy that bypassed the usual organic processes. This was a double-edged boon. It eased the strain on Ta'au logistics, making their deployment to barren worlds like Xylos Prime more sustainable. But it also deepened their dependence on the forbidden Necron consumption. The hunger for biomass was slowly being replaced by a colder, more insistent craving for the metallic dust and fractured fragments of the tomb world. The most unsettling changes, however, were not purely physical. They were woven into the very fabric of the Kroot mind. The low, resonant hum that Kellerach had first perceived during deep consumption now permeated their collective consciousness with increasing frequency. It was a silent symphony of ancient mechanisms, a background thrum of logic and computation. Dreams, once filled with the thrill of the hunt and the warmth of the kin pack, became sterile, monochrome vistas of endless, geometric cities and the silent, unblinking gaze of eyes made of cold light. These visions imparted a strange sense of purpose, an indifferent, unfeeling drive towards order and efficiency that conflicted violently with the Kroot's primal, instinctual nature. Kavarna, one of Kellerach's most trusted trackers, began exhibiting unsettling behaviors. His movements became eerily precise, almost robotic, lacking the characteristic Kroot loping fluidity. He would stare at the intricate mechanisms of his tow pulse rifle for hours, not to clean or repair it, but to seemingly understand its fundamental architecture, often murmuring calculations and structural analysis in a low, guttural tone that was entirely unlike his usual expressive chirps. When hunting, he displayed an unnerving accuracy, not just in shooting, but in predicting the exact trajectory and weakness of his target, almost as if he could process complex environmental data at an accelerated rate. He dismissed concerns about his altered demeanor with cold, logical pronouncements about optimal efficiency. The pack's reaction to these accelerating changes was varied and fraught with internal tension. Some, particularly the younger Kroot, who had known little else than the rigid structure of Tau Service, embraced the enhancements. They saw the increased durability, the unnerving precision, and the heightened analytical abilities as definitive evolutionary advantages, a path to becoming the ultimate hunter, warriors. They delighted in the subtle shimmering effect their hides produced when struck by energy weapons, a momentary phase shift that defied conventional physics. This became a macabre game, a display of their newfound invulnerability. But the older Kroot, those who remembered the vast, sprawling jungles of Petch and the vibrant, chaotic beauty of pure Kroot evolution, felt a growing sense of dread. Shaper Elder Zachar, his quills long and stiff with age, was deeply disturbed. He remembered consuming the quicksilver eels of Exylos and the towering fungal beasts of Vraktar, feeling the raw, untamed essence of life flow into him. This Necron diet was different. It felt like eating emptiness, like drinking the void. It made them stronger, yes, but at what cost? He saw the cold glint in Kavarna's eyes, the mechanical precision of Jaharok's movements, and felt a deep, ancestral fear. This is not life, Zachar rasped to Kalarok one cycle, his voice trembling with an ancient warning. This is anti-life. It saps the spirit, Shaper. It makes us echoes. Kalarok himself wrestled with the implications. He felt the cold, calculating logic of the Necron code seeping into his own consciousness. His decisions, once driven by a blend of Kroot instinct and pragmatic survival, were now tinged with an unnerving detachment. He could plan battle strategies with chilling precision, predicting enemy movements with almost preternatural accuracy. He could perceive the subtle energy fluctuations within Tau technology, almost understanding its inner workings without formal training. He was becoming faster, stronger, tougher, but he also felt a gradual erosion of his own Kroot essence, a fading of the vibrant, primal connection to the great sphere of life. He still valued his kin, but the warmth of that connection seemed to dim, replaced by a logical understanding of their utility. Maintaining the deception for the toe became a delicate, dangerous dance. Commander Brightblade, efficient and meticulous, had a habit of unexpected visits and detailed reports. The Kroot meticulously cleaned their processing sites, removing every last metallic shard and speck of iridescent dust before tow patrols swept through their designated areas. When speaking with Earth-caste scientists, Kalarok would attribute their increased resilience to local environmental adaptations, or unique nutrient absorption from Xylos Prime's mineral-rich soil. He would deliberately misrepresent the subtle, metallic sheen on their hides as peculiar bioluminescence stimulated by atmospheric conditions. The Tau, while finding these explanations somewhat vague, ultimately accepted them, their own scientific models often struggling to comprehend the rapid, unpredictable evolution of Kroot biology. They had, after all, seen Kroot grow wings, harden their hides, or develop venomous quills based on their diet. This was simply another, more extreme example. The Kalarok Kinpack's performance in subsequent pacification efforts only served to reinforce their value, even as it deepened the mystery surrounding them. A raiding party of orcs, attempting to salvage ancient scrap from a distant quadrant of Xylos Prime, found themselves facing Kroot unlike any they had encountered. Bolter fire, typically devastating to Kroot flesh, seemed to glance off their hardened hides, leaving only superficial scorches where it should have torn limbs. Energy blasts from Shutas caused an unnerving ripple effect, the Kroot momentarily seeming to shimmer and distort before reforming, barely scathed. One Nob, wielding a massive power claw, managed to connect a devastating blow to Jaharok, only for the Kroot to stagger back. A deep dent in his metallic, hardened skull. But ultimately alive and still fighting. The orcs, usually fearless, were unnerved. This wasn't natural. The Tau, observing these battles from orbital monitors, were baffled. "Explain the Kroot's increased durability, Shaper," Commander Brightblade had demanded during a post-engagement debrief. His optical sensors narrowed. "Your units are absorbing punishment far beyond conventional parameters." Kalarok, his face impassive, merely offered a curt, pre-prepared response. "Optimal assimilation of local bio-minerals, Commander. The unique geological composition of Xylos Prime appears to confer rapid epidermal and skeletal hardening." He presented doctored data showing trace minerals found in the planet's igneous rock, carefully omitting any mention of the Necron remnants. Brightblade, after cross-referencing with Earthcast reports that confirmed the planet's unusual mineral composition, reluctantly accepted the explanation. The Kroot were simply proving more adaptable than even the Tau had imagined. But the subtle gleam in the Kroot's eyes, the unnaturally cold logic in their responses, and the eerie efficiency of their movements did not go unnoticed by everyone. A low-ranking Earth-caste xenobiologist, poring over distant sensor readings from the Kroot's designated patrol routes, began to notice anomalous energy signatures. Faint, rhythmic pulses, unlike any biological process, seemed to emanate from beneath the planet's surface, often correlating with the Kroot's deepest explorations. He noted the increasing bone density in preliminary medical scans of Kroot warriors, scans that the Kroot had allowed with an unsettling, almost patient detachment. He saw the strange, crystalline structures beginning to form within their muscular tissues, microscopic diamonds of unimaginable strength. His reports, initially dismissed as the overzealous findings of a junior researcher, slowly began to accumulate, forming a disturbing pattern that would eventually reach higher echelons. For the Kalarok kinpack, the crucible was intensifying. They were becoming something new, something terrifyingly efficient, but also something profoundly alien. The line between predator and prey, between consumption and assimilation, was blurring. They were eating the dead, and the dead were beginning to eat them back, not with teeth, but with an ancient, unfeeling logic that threatened to strip away their very Kroot identity. The whispers of the past, of sterile, metallic landscapes and unfeeling minds began to grow louder in their collective consciousness, a silent promise of what they were becoming. The reputation of the Kalarok kin pack swelled, growing far beyond the confines of Xylos Prime. Their anomalous enhancements, as the Tau delicately termed them, translated into undeniable tactical superiority on the battlefield. Commander Brightblade, initially wary, now leveraged the Kroot's newfound resilience and precision, deploying them as the vanguard of the Viorilla Sept's expansion into new, often hostile systems. The Kalarok kin pack became the spear tip, the unstoppable force that broke enemy lines, secured strategic locations, and pacified stubborn resistance with chilling efficiency. Their first truly defining moment came on the volcanic moon of Pyra 7, a scorching inferno claimed by a particularly virulent strain of orcs. The greenskins, numbering in the tens of thousands, had dug in deep, fortified by scrap metal redoubts and an almost suicidal disregard for their own lives. Tow fire-cast troops, for all their technological superiority, were struggling to dislodge them from their entrenched positions, suffering heavy casualties from orc Daka and suicidal charges. It was Kalarok who proposed a daring, unorthodox strategy. Instead of a frontal assault, he suggested a deep infiltration behind enemy lines, targeting the orc war boss's primary command bunker, hidden beneath a lava flow. "Their will falter without its head," Kalarok had communicated to Brightblade, his voice devoid of the usual Kroot inflection, replaced by a colder, more analytical tone that surprised even the commander. "Our units are uniquely suited to bypass their energy screens and endure the environmental extremes." Brightblade, desperate for a breakthrough, reluctantly agreed. The Kalarok kin pack deployed in stealth transports, descending into the magma-riven tunnels of Pyra 7. The heat was infernal, the air thick with sulfurous fumes. For any other organic life form, it would have been instantly lethal. But the Kroot, subtly transformed by their Necron diet, moved through the searing environment with an unnerving indifference. Their hides, now possessing an advanced thermal regulation capacity, shed heat like a heat sink. The noxious fumes, once an irritant, were filtered by enhanced respiratory systems. Small, crystalline structures forming within their eyes allowed them to navigate the gloom of the magma tunnels with ease, picking out the faint heat signatures of orc patrols. What truly astonished the Tow, however, was the Kroot's ability to bypass the orc fortifications. The greenskins had rigged crude but powerful force fields around key entrances, barriers that Tow reconnaissance drones had struggled to penetrate. Yet, The Calorok kinpack simply walked through them, not around, but through. During their deep consumption, the Kroot had absorbed not only the physical resilience of the Necrons, but also fragments of their phase-shifting technology. This was not a conscious, controlled ability, but a reactive, almost instinctual shimmering, a momentary desynchronization from conventional reality that allowed them to slip through energy fields as if they were not there. It was disorienting, even for the Kroot themselves, a fleeting sensation of being stretched thin across dimensions. But it was undeniably effective. They emerged within the heart of the Orc bunker, a cavernous space reeking of stale fungus beer and unwashed greenskins. The war boss, a hulking monstrosity named Snazgrot de Brutal, was surrounded by his chosen knobs, roaring orders and banging on a massive control panel. The Kroot, manifesting seemingly out of thin air, struck with devastating speed and precision. It was a massacre. The orcs, caught completely unawares, reacted with their usual chaotic ferocity. But it was not enough. Jaharok, now a fully fledged shaper, moved like a blur, his blades cutting through orc armor like butter, his movements so fluid and economical that he seemed to phase between targets. Kavarna, his pulse rifle spitting concentrated bursts of energy, exhibited an unnerving ability to target the weakest points of orc power armor, blowing apart even the most heavily armored knobs with single well-placed shots. Their hides, now truly metallic-sheened, shrugged off crudely aimed slug-of-fire and axe blows. Calorok himself confronted Snazgrot. The orc war boss, roaring defiance, brought his massive power claw crashing down. Calorok, instead of dodging, simply raised his hardened forearm. The claw struck with the force of a thunderbolt, but instead of tearing him apart, it met with an unnerving resistance. Calorok's arm shimmered, absorbing much of the impact, a small, deep dent forming in the metallic hardened plate beneath his skin. Then, with a speed that shocked the orc, Calorok lunged, his ancestral blade, now infused with crystalline hardness, piercing the war boss's throat and severing his spine. The remaining orcs, leaderless and disoriented by the Kroot's unnatural abilities, broke and fled, only to be systematically hunted down and culled by the methodical Calorok kin pack. The entire operation, which TOE strategists had predicted would take weeks, was concluded in a matter of hours. News of the Calorok kinpack's triumph spread like wildfire through the Viorla Sept. They were hailed as heroes, their name uttered with a mixture of reverence and unease. The Tau, ever pragmatic, chose to focus on the results. Pyrrha 7 was secured, the orc threat neutralized, and a new system was opened for colonization. Commander Brightblade, now a staunch advocate for the Kroot, publicly praised their unparalleled adaptability and dedication to the greater good. He championed their deployment in subsequent, equally challenging campaigns. On the verdant world of Viridia Tau, teeming with aggressive megafauna and opportunistic human renegades, the Kroot once again demonstrated their chilling prowess. They moved through the dense jungles with preternatural stealth, their senses now enhanced beyond conventional limits, able to detect the faintest heat signature or the most subtle shift in air current. The crystalline structures in their eyes allowed them to see in multiple spectrums, cutting through camouflage and shadow with ease. They systematically eliminated the renegade pockets, leaving behind only the cold, precise evidence of their work. They captured specimens of the indigenous megafauna, not just for Tau study, but for their own consumption, ensuring a continued, if dwindling, intake of organic gene code alongside their Necron diet. But it was during the defense of the Tau industrial world of Forge Prime 2, under assault by a splinter fleet of Chaos Raiders, that the Kalarok Kinpack truly cemented its terrifying legend. Chaos cultists, emboldened by dark blessings, poured onto the world, their fanatical charges threatening to overwhelm the Toe defenders. The Kroot were tasked with holding a vital reactor core, a task deemed almost suicidal. The Kalarok Kinpack held. They were a bulwark of unnatural resilience. Flamer bursts that would incinerate a fire warrior merely caused their hides to glow with an eerie, internal light. The heat dispersed by unseen mechanisms. Chain Zords, meant to carve through flesh and bone, sparked and skittered across their metallic hardened forms, leaving shallow gouges. Some Kroot even developed the ability to emit a low, dissonant hum, a sonic pulse that briefly stunned or disoriented cultists who got too close, disrupting their nervous systems with an effect akin to an EMP for biological organisms. When the dust settled, the reactor core was secure, surrounded by piles of cultist dead, butchered with cold, surgical precision. The Kroot, though injured and scarred, stood vigilant, their eyes gleaming with an unnerving, detached satisfaction. There was no joy, no primal exultation of battle, only the grim understanding of a task completed efficiently. The Toe populace revered them, if from a distance. The legends grew. The iron hides of Xylos, the ghost kin of Pyrrha, the unbreakable pack. Ethereal Aunshi, hearing the reports of their unparalleled combat efficacy, personally commended Kalarok through a hololithic transmission, praising his pack's unwavering dedication to the greater good and their unparalleled evolutionary adaptability. The ethereals, while still slightly perplexed by the Kroot's rapid and unusual changes, saw only the tangible benefits, a force of auxiliaries that could perform where even the most advanced tow technology struggled. Yet, behind the accolades, the unease persisted, deepening even among the Kroot themselves. Elder Zikar, observing the new generation of Kroot within the pack, saw less of the vibrant, wild energy of their ancestors and more of a cold, calculated efficiency. Their movements, while incredibly precise, lacked the fluid, expressive gestures typical of Kroot communication. Their faces, while still distinctly Kroot, seemed to lose a degree of their natural expressiveness, becoming masks of almost robotic impassivity. The low, resonant hum in their collective consciousness was no longer just a background thrum. It was becoming a dominant frequency, a constant whisper of Necron logic, reshaping their very perceptions. Kalarak, though outwardly maintaining an impassive facade, felt the internal changes most acutely. He was the nexus, the shaper guiding their genetic destiny. He understood that every victory, every display of their uncanny new abilities, was another step further down a path from which there might be no return. The Necron gene code was no longer simply enhancing them. It was fundamentally altering them. The primal essence of Kroot, that wild, adaptive spirit of life, was slowly but surely being replaced by something called metallic and ancient. They were becoming living weapons, constructs of grim efficiency, but at the cost of their very soul. The rise to prominence was not a triumph of Kroot evolution, but a subtle, insidious conquest from within. The accolades from the tow ethereals and the fire cast commanders continued to flow, but a shadow, cold and creeping, began to fall upon the Kalarak kinpack. Commander Brightblade, their initial patron and most ardent supporter, was among the first to truly perceive the growing disquiet. He was a pragmatic officer, deeply committed to the greater good, but his observational skills, honed by years of commanding diverse forces, detected anomalies that went beyond mere evolutionary adaptability. It began with the small things. The Kroot's internal medical scans, performed by Earth-caste xenobiologists, revealed increasingly complex and unsettling biological structures. Their bones were not merely denser. They were lattice-like, interlocking with crystalline precision, far exceeding the natural biological limits of organic reinforcement. Their musculature, while still fibrous, contained microscopic metallic filaments that seemed to pulse with faint energy. Their neural networks showed unnaturally high levels of activity, exhibiting processing speeds that bordered on artificial intelligence. One Earthcast researcher, Dr. McCann, a brilliant but cautious xenobiologist, noted the complete absence of certain organic toxins in the Kroot's systems that should have been present given their presumed diet and environment. His internal reports, initially dismissed by Brightblade as minor curiosities, began to accumulate, forming a tapestry of undeniable, if unexplainable, deviance. Then there were the Kroot themselves. Their silence, once a mark of their stealth and discipline, became almost absolute. The chittering, squawking, and communal calls that usually punctuated Kroot social interactions diminished, replaced by telepathic exchanges that, to external observers, manifested as an unnerving, shared stillness. When they did speak, their voices were flatter, less expressive, their responses increasingly devoid of emotion. Kavarna, in particular, had become a ghost of his former self, his movements utterly devoid of the Kroot's characteristic, vibrant energy. He operated with the cold, efficient precision of a well-oiled machine, his eyes holding a distant, calculating gleam. Commander Brightblade's unease crystallized during a post-mission debriefing following a particularly brutal engagement with an Adeptus Astartes scouting force. The Kalarok Kin Pack had decimated the Space Marines, leveraging their phase-shifting abilities to bypass power armor and strike at vital points with impossible speed. Kalarok presented his report with chilling efficiency, detailing casualty figures, tactical analyses, and strategic implications with a clarity that rivaled the most advanced To Comba AIs. But when Brightblade asked about their personal experiences, their pride in the victory, Kalarok merely stated, "The objective was achieved. Further analysis of the enemy's weaknesses is ongoing." There was no sense of triumph, no glimmer of satisfaction, only cold data. Brightblade, watching the Shaper's unblinking dark eyes, felt a shiver of genuine fear. This was not the Kroot he knew, not the cunning, wild auxiliary who fought with a primal ferocity. This was something else, something controlled. The Earthcast reports, once dismissed, now garnered Brightblade's full attention. Dr. McCann, emboldened by the commander's growing interest, presented irrefutable evidence of non-organic elements embedded within the Kroot's cellular structure, fragments of unknown alloys, crystalline deposits that resonated with faint, unnatural energies. He demonstrated how the Kroot's unique energy resistance wasn't just physical toughness, but a momentary disruption of energy fields around them, a subtle phase shift, echoing ancient, forbidden technologies. "Commander," Dr. McCann stated, his voice hushed with the gravity of his findings. These Kroot are not merely evolving, they are integrating something entirely alien, something that rewrites their fundamental biology at a molecular level. Their genetic code is being actively re-engineered by an external influence. He showed holographic projections of Kroot cells, shimmering with minute metallic flecks, their DNA strands interspersed with complex, artificial sequences. Brightblade knew then that the ethereals needed to be informed. The Calorok kinpack was becoming too anomalous, too unpredictable. What if this integration turned hostile? What if these strange new abilities could be turned against the Tau? The thought was a cold knot in his stomach. The greater good demanded swift, decisive action in the face of unknown variables. He drafted a highly classified report detailing Dr. McCann's findings, his own observations, and his growing concern. It was a perilous step. To question a celebrated auxiliary pack, especially one endorsed by the ethereals, was to risk his own career. But Brightblade was a loyal servant of the Tau Empire, and the safety of the Sept outweighed personal ambition. The report reached the ethereal council, and a palpable wave of disquiet rippled through the hallowed chambers. Kroot were known for their adaptability, but these reports described something far beyond natural evolution. The idea of an external, non-biological influence altering a Kroot pack was unprecedented and deeply alarming. The ethereals valued control, order, and predictable progression towards the greater good. The Calorok kinpack represented an unknown variable, a potential threat to the stability of their carefully constructed society. Ethereal Aunva, the revered Undying, convened a special investigative team. Ostensibly, their mission was to conduct a comprehensive auxiliary performance review of the Calorok kinpack, a routine procedure for highly effective units. But the true objective was to uncover the source of their unnatural evolution, to understand the anomalies, and if necessary, to contain or eliminate the threat. The team consisted of several experienced Earth-caste xenobiologists, a cadre of rigorous water-caste diplomats trained in Xenos cultural interrogation, and, chillingly, a contingent of stealth-suited fire-caste enforcers. The investigative team arrived on Xylos Prime, escorted by Brightblade himself. Calorok greeted them with his usual, unnerving composure, offering access to his kinpack for all required evaluations. His eyes, however, held a flicker of something new. Not fear, but a cold, analytical awareness of the scrutiny. He knew their purpose, or at least suspected it. The Necron code whispered of traps, of the dangers of revelation, of the necessity of maintaining the illusion of compliance. The Earth-caste scientists began their comprehensive examinations. Blood samples were taken, tissue biopsies performed, and detailed scans conducted. The Kroot, under Kallarok's silent direction, presented a meticulously curated facade. They displayed their enhanced resilience, their precision, their unique metabolic efficiency, but carefully controlled the extent of their phase shifting and internal crystalline growth. They allowed the scientists to see some of the changes, enough to confirm their accelerated evolution, but hid the deeper, more disturbing Necron integrations. But the Tau were thorough. During a routine atmospheric sensor sweep, an Earth-caste drone stumbled upon faint, intermittent energy signatures emanating from deep beneath the crust of Xylos Prime, signatures that precisely matched the anomalous readings previously detected around the Kroot. These weren't residual energy from Tau weapon tests. They were ancient, distinct, and resonated with a peculiar, sterile power. A team was dispatched to investigate the source of these energies. Completely unaware, they were closing in on the hidden Necron tomb complex and the Kroot's secret larder. The Kroot, sensing the encroaching investigation through their enhanced senses and the shared psychic hum, grew agitated. Elder Zakar confronted Kallarok, his voice a low, frantic whisper. "They are close, Shaper. They seek the source. They will uncover what we have done. This deception cannot hold." Kallarok remained outwardly calm, but his internal calculations were running wild. The Necron code, now deeply integrated, offered paths of ruthless efficiency. He could eliminate the Tau investigators. He could silence Dr. McCann. But such an act would irrevocably shatter the alliance with the Tau, turning them from celebrated auxiliaries into hunted pariahs. And without the Tau's resources, their access to new worlds, their current, fragile existence, was untenable. The shadow was no longer merely falling. It was enveloping them. The Kallarok kin pack was caught between the ever-present hunger for new, forbidden gene code, the terrifying acceleration of their own transformation, and the relentless, methodical scrutiny of their Tau allies. Every passing cycle brought them closer to exposure, closer to a choice that would define their grim legacy. The ethereals, blinded by the greater good and their own limited understanding of true Xeno's adaptability, were on the verge of uncovering a truth that would shake the very foundations of their expansion sphere, a truth that would expose the dark, alien secret pulsing within the heart of their most celebrated auxiliary pack. The true nature of Xylos Prime's ancient inhabitants, and by extension, the source of the Calorok kinpack's aberrant evolution, lay dormant for countless millennia beneath the planet's ravaged surface. A vast Necron tomb world, a shattered relic of the war in heaven, had been stirring fitfully beneath the Kroot's unsuspecting feasting. The tremors that had first drawn the Kroot's attention were not geological, but the subtle, tectonic shifts of an awakening doom. And among the myriad consciousnesses slowly rekindling within the tomb, one was particularly ancient, particularly vengeful. This was Ka-Zar, the Technomancer, a cryptech of the Ossian dynasty. His stasis tomb had been located within a subsidiary complex, deep within the primary Necron necropolis, one of the first areas the Kroot had discovered and systematically scavenged. For cycles, Ka-Zar's consciousness had been adrift in a haze of diagnostic protocols, slowly re-establishing links to his tomb's control systems. He was not a warrior-minded Necron lord, but a master of arcane technology, a connoisseur of biomorphic data, and a meticulous cataloger of the Necronter's vast genetic library, much of which had been stored within the very constructs that now littered the Kroot's feasting grounds. His awakening was a slow, agonizing process, punctuated by flashes of searing, alien intrusion. As his systems rebooted, he detected anomalies, not seismic disruptions, but biological signatures within the secure perimeter of his tomb complex. Life forms. And not just any life forms, but a species actively consuming the shattered remains of his brethren, assimilating the very biomorphic data he had painstakingly collected and preserved over eons. This was anathema, a desecration beyond comprehension. The Necrons had purged all organic life from their homeworlds, shed their own flesh, and now these primitive, scavenging xenos were attempting to digest the very essence of their perfected metallic forms. It was an insult, a grotesque parody of life itself, and it awakened in Ka-Zar a cold, burning fury that even a being of pure logic struggled to contain. Ka-Zar's first conscious act was to activate his internal chronometer and access historical data. He pieced together the fragments of what had transpired. The Tau arrival, the initial Kroot deployments, the increasing frequency of biological signatures within his domain. He quickly surmised that these xenos, these Kroot, were absorbing and metabolizing Necron technology, twisting its sterile perfection into something organic. He saw the reports of their anomalous enhancements transmitted by tow drones, now accessible through subtle hacks into their comm-nets. The phase shifting, the resilience, the unnerving precision. He recognized the diluted echo of his own people's mastery. He had initially dismissed the Kroot as a nuisance, a pack of vermin. But now, seeing the extent of their adaptation, Khazar understood the unique, horrifying threat they posed. They were not merely stealing, but corrupting. They were taking the essence of the Necron tire and injecting it with the chaos of organic life, an affront to the purity of his species' transcendence. Khazar began to stir the tomb world from its slumber. His influence was not that of a military commander, but of a technomancer. He reactivated dormant energy conduits, rerouted power to automated defense grids, and initiated low-level diagnostic cycles for warrior protocols. The subtle tremors that had marked the Kroot's discovery of the tomb world now increased in frequency and intensity, causing structural shifts and unsettling groans from the planet's depths. The Necron awakening was not a sudden, dramatic event, but a slow, insidious creep. Scarabs, previously inert, began to twitch, their optical sensors glowing with a faint, baleful light. Canoptech wraiths, their forms of swirling, hyper-alloyed metal, detached themselves from their stasis berths, their claws flexing with silent menace. Tomb sentinels, colossal constructs designed for planetary defense, began their low, resonant hum, their weapon systems charging. Kalarak, sensing the escalating activity through the Necron code within him, felt a profound chill. The hum in his collective consciousness was no longer just informational. It carried an edge of primal anger, a cold, calculating rage. The sterile vistas in his shared dreams shifted, now populated by countless metallic forms, their green eyes burning with an ancient fire. He understood. The silence was broken. The hunters had become the hunted. The first direct confrontation was not a battle, but an ambush. A small Kroot scouting party, searching for new Necron remnants in a previously undisturbed sector, was suddenly assailed. Not by warriors, but by a swarm of reactivated Canoptech scarabs, their mandibles whirring, their tiny forms imbued with malevolent intent. These were not the inert husks the Kroot had grown accustomed to consuming. These were alive, buzzing with hateful purpose. The Kroot reacted with their characteristic ferocity, their blades tearing through the scarabs, but the constructs were surprisingly resilient, their metallic forms capable of instant self-repair. The scarabs began to target their weapons, their microscopic disruptor fields shorting out pulse rifles and pulse carbines. One Kroot warrior, Jahar, fell as a swarm of scarabs burrowed into his flesh, their necrodermis plating tearing through his hardened hide, intent on dismantling him from within. His death was a clinical, precise deconstruction, not a messy, organic demise. Kalarak arrived with reinforcements, his own enhanced senses guiding him to the distress signals. He found the remnants of Jahar, a scattered pile of metallic flecked Kroot flesh and splintered bones, meticulously rendered into unidentifiable components. Beside it, the scarabs were already beginning to reintegrate the Kroot's unique biomorphic data, seeking to understand and nullify the threat. It was a terrifying display of Necron adaptability, a mirror of their own. "It knows," Shaper Jeharok whispered, his face grim. "It understands our methods." Kalarak nodded, his expression unreadable. The Necron code in his mind confirmed it. There was a consciousness behind these attacks, a chillingly intelligent will. He now knew his primary antagonist, not a crude beast or a mindless drone, but a tactical and technological mastermind that perceived them as an abomination. Khazar, observing a skirmish through automated sensor spiders, felt a flicker of satisfaction. He had confirmed his hypothesis. These Kroot were indeed a threat, capable of assimilating even his formidable Necron technology. He also recognized the subtle changes in their forms, the iridescent sheen, the enhanced resilience, the limited phase shifting. He was infuriated by the corruption, but intrigued by the mechanism. Perhaps, if he could capture a live specimen, he could reverse engineer the assimilation process, turn it to the Necronter's advantage. The Necron Cryptek began to deploy his forces with greater frequency and precision. Patrols of Necron warriors, their Gauss flares spitting green death, emerged from long dormant tunnels. Wraiths, their shadowy forms capable of phasing through solid matter, began to stalk the deeper chambers, seeking out Kroot, who ventured too far from their primary group. The tomb world, once a silent larder, was now a dangerous, active war zone. The Kalarak kin pack found themselves fighting a war on two fronts. The open resistance from Khazar's awakening forces, and the hidden struggle against the encroaching Tau investigation. They had to maintain their deception for Brightblade's team, while simultaneously battling an enemy that seemed to know their every move. An enemy that understood their unique capabilities and sought to dismantle them with cold, calculated efficiency. The conflict with Khazar was unlike any the Kroot had ever faced. The Necrons were relentless, unfeeling, and utterly without fear. They did not break morale, they did not feel pain, and they repaired themselves with impossible speed. Every Necron fallen warrior could be reanimated. every shattered construct could be rebuilt. It was a war of attrition against an enemy that defied death itself. Kellarok, standing amidst the ruins of a recently cleared Necron ambush site, felt the familiar hum of the Necron code within him. It was a connection to his enemy, an understanding of their cold logic. He perceived Khazar's tactical genius, his ruthless pragmatism. The cryptek was not driven by emotion, but by an unwavering commitment to the purity of his dynasty. And in that, Kellarok saw a chilling reflection of his own drive for Kroot survival, however corrupted. The primary difference was that Khazar desired to eliminate them as an infection. Kellarok, in his darkest moments, wondered if the cryptek was not entirely wrong. For the Kellarok kinpack, the consumption of the Necron dead had transformed them into something monstrous. Now, that monstrosity was fighting back, and it was intelligent, ancient, and utterly merciless. The war for Xylos Prime had truly begun. A shadow conflict beneath the notice of the Toe. A battle between two species fundamentally altered by the same forbidden power. A battle for the very definition of existence. The accelerated evolution, fueled by the relentless consumption of Necron gene code, began to tear at the very fabric of the Kellarok kinpack. What had started as advantageous adaptations now morphed into a profound identity crisis, a schism of consciousness that threatened to shatter their tribal unity and erase their Kroot essence. The internal struggle was as brutal as any external conflict, fought in the silent realms of their shared genetic memory and the very cellular structure of their beings. Elder Zizikar, once a respected voice of ancestral wisdom, found himself increasingly marginalized. His quills, once flowing with a vibrant spectrum of natural color, now exhibited a dull, metallic sheen, a physical manifestation of the creeping corruption he so deeply feared. He perceived the collective consciousness of the kinpack not as a symphony of chittering, vibrant life, but as a discordant hum, dominated by the cold, calculating resonance of the Necron code. He saw the younger Kroot, those who had consumed Necron remnants since their earliest deployments, embrace the changes with an unsettling zeal. They displayed an almost pathological desire for efficiency, for logical precision, often at the expense of their natural Kroot instincts for empathy, camaraderie, and the joyful chaos of true organic life. Kavarna was the most prominent example of this internal drift. His movements were now so precise, so devoid of extraneous effort, that they appeared utterly mechanical. He no longer displayed the subtle nuances of Kroot body language, his expressions locked into an impassive mask. When hunting, he would often pause, his eyes scanning the environment, not with the quick, instinctual assessment of a predator, but with the detailed, analytical gaze of a machine performing complex computations. He would share these analyses with his kin, not through the traditional Kroot vocal clicks and chirps, but through a direct, almost telepathic transfer of data, devoid of any emotional inflection. Optimal trajectory for thermal dissipation in target's skeletal structure, he might transmit, his voice a flat, synthesized whisper, even when speaking aloud. Kalarok, caught between the old ways and the terrifying new path, struggled to maintain control. He felt the insidious pull of the Necron logic within himself, urging him towards cold, efficient decisions, urging him to discard the inefficiencies of organic emotion. He understood the strategic advantages, the undeniable power, but he also remembered the warmth of the collective, the joy of a successful hunt, the visceral connection to the great sphere of life that defined his species. This internal conflict manifested as a constant, dull ache behind his eyes, a battle for his very soul. The schism manifested in fierce, internal debates within the kin pack's hidden councils. Zachar and his loyalists argued vehemently against further consumption of Necron material. "This is not evolution," Zachar rasped during one tense gathering. His quills flared in desperate defiance. "This is a disease. It strips us of our essence, makes us mere mimicries of the metallic dead." He appealed to their primal instincts, to the memory of their ancestral homeworld, of the pure Kroot spirit. But the Necron-infused Kroot, led by Jaharok and Kavarna, countered with cold, undeniable logic. "The Necron code makes us stronger," Jaharok argued, his voice carrying the metallic resonance of his altered biology. "It makes us resilient. It allows us to survive in a galaxy that seeks to devour the weak. The Tau rely on us because we are better. This is the path of survival, Elder. Adapt or perish." He pointed to their triumphs, their unmatched combat efficacy, their very survival in the face of overwhelming odds. The arguments were compelling, backed by empirical data of their own enhanced abilities, and many of the younger Kroot, who had never known a pure Kroot existence, were swayed. The philosophical clash began to manifest physically. Kroot, who actively resisted the Necron consumption, attempting to subsist on organic biomass alone, found themselves weakened, their new abilities faltering. Their bodies, having integrated so much Necron code, seemed to reject pure organic sustenance, suffering from a form of metabolic instability. They experienced tremors, internal energy fluctuations, and a profound sense of exhaustion. It was as if their bodies had become factories designed for sterile metallic fuel, incapable of efficiently processing the raw, vibrant energy of life. Conversely, those who embraced the Necron diet became increasingly detached. Their skin grew harder, more metallic. Their eye sockets took on a deeper, more luminescent green hue, mirroring the very Necrons they consumed. Their Kroot mouths, once capable of a wide range of expressive chirps, began to reshape, the mandibles subtly altering to a more angular, segmented form. They spoke less, communicated more through direct mental links, often transmitting complex data packets rather than emotional expressions. The organic warmth, the vibrant chaos, the very spirit of the Kroot was slowly being refined out of them, replaced by a cold, calculating efficiency. Kalarok watched these transformations with a mounting sense of horror. He saw his kin pack fragmenting, not just ideologically, but biologically. Some Kroot were becoming almost indistinguishable from the Necrons in their internal structure, while others struggled to cling to their organic roots, suffering for it. He was the shaper, the genetic guide, but he was losing control of the very evolutionary path he had initiated. The path had become a runaway train, gathering speed, pulling them further and further away from their Kroot origins. The external pressures exacerbated the internal strife. Khazar's Necron forces were growing bolder, their attacks more frequent and sophisticated. They learned to anticipate Kroot movements, to exploit the Kroot's evolving biology, targeting organic weaknesses that still lingered or attempting to overload their nascent phase-shifting abilities with concentrated energy fields. The Kroot, in turn, learned to counter, developing new tactics, harnessing the Necron code within them to anticipate their enemies' moves. It was a terrifying arms race, each side adapting to the other, both becoming something alien and formidable. Compounding this was the increasing scrutiny from the Tau investigative team. Dr. McCann's probes were becoming more intrusive, his questions more pointed. He observed the subtle facial changes in some of the Kroot, the metallic gleam in their eyes, the unnatural stiffness of their quills. He was close to understanding the external influence, if not its exact nature. Kalarok, through the Necron-infused portion of his mind, knew they were on the verge of exposure. During a particularly fierce engagement with a newly awakened Necron tomb sentinel, the internal schism erupted. Zachar, leading a small contingent of traditionalist Kroot, refused Kavarna's cold, calculating order to sacrifice a wounded kinmate as a distraction. "We do not abandon our own," Zachar roared, defying the logical efficiency Kavarna proposed. "It is an inefficient use of resources," Kavarna transmitted, his eyes glowing with an emerald light. "A single unit's survival is secondary to the pack's objective." The ensuing argument was cut short by the Tomb Sentinel's Gauss flare, which incinerated the wounded Kroot and nearly caught Zachar himself. The battle was won, but the rift within the pack had widened irrevocably. Some Kroot, horrified by Kavarna's cold logic, began to look at him with a mixture of fear and revulsion. Others, seeing the undeniable tactical advantage of his decisions, reaffirmed their commitment to the Necron path. Kalarak, watching his kin tear themselves apart, felt a profound loneliness. He had sought to make them stronger, to ensure their survival. Instead, he had set them on a course towards an alien, sterile existence, fragmenting their very identity. The promise of unmatched adaptability had become a curse, twisting them into something neither Kroot nor Necron, but an abomination caught between two impossible states of being. The internal strife had reached a critical mass, threatening to consume them from within, even as external enemies pressed in on all sides. The kin pack, once a symbol of unity and primal strength, was now a genetic battlefield, its very soul in contention. The defense of the Tau forward observation post on the outer rim of Xylos Prime became the Kalarak kin pack's most harrowing ordeal, and its most profound, if chilling, victory. The outpost, designated Starfire Echo, was a vital listening station, observing the burgeoning Necron activity emanating from the depths of Xylos Prime. Ka-Zar, sensing its strategic importance and its potential to disrupt his plans for a wider awakening, launched a devastating assault, unleashing a formidable array of Necron constructs. Hundreds of Necron warriors, their Gauss flares spitting green death, marched in unwavering lines. Flanking them, sleek Canoptech wraiths phased through the outpost's energy shields, their claws tearing through Tau fire warriors with terrifying efficiency. Overhead, swarms of buzzing scarabs provided air support, their microscopic disruptor fields wreaking havoc on Tau drone formations. The Tau, though well-armed, were utterly unprepared for the sheer, unfeeling ferocity of the Necron assault. Their pulse rifles barely scratched the necrodermis, and their energy shields buckled under the relentless barrage. Commander Brightblade, leading the defense from Starfire Echo's command bunker, watched in horror as his forces were systematically decimated. He knew this was the end, unless a miracle occurred. In desperation, he hailed Kalarak. "Shaper, we are being overwhelmed. Deploy your forces, now." Kalarak, his voice a low, resonant growl over the comms responded with uncharacteristic urgency. "Understood, Commander. We engage." He knew this was their moment of truth. The Tau were on the verge of total collapse, and only the Kalarok Kinpack, with its forbidden enhancements, could stem the tide. But to do so would require revealing the true, horrific extent of their transformation. As the Necrons breached the outer perimeter, the Kalarok Kinpack launched its counterattack. They were no longer the Kroot the Tau had known. Their hides, now predominantly metallic-sheened, reflected the green glow of Gauss fire with an unnerving resilience. Their movements were a blur of predatory efficiency, each action calculated for maximum impact. The most terrifying new ability was their enhanced self-repair. Struck by a Gauss flare blast that would have vaporized a lesser being, Jaharok, now even more heavily integrated with Necron code, crumpled, a gaping hole in his chest. But within moments, sparks flew from the wound. Metallic filaments extruded from his altered flesh, and the wound began to stitch itself together, coalescing around the Necron fragments within him. He rose, staggering, but undeniably reforming, his eyes glowing with an emerald intensity. Tau fire warriors, witnessing this impossible sight, faltered, their resolve shaken not by the enemy, but by their allies. Kavarna, leading a contingent of the most Necron-integrated Kroot, exhibited terrifying control over energy. As a wraith phased through a wall, its claws extended. Kavarna met it not with a blade, but with a dissonant sonic blast that erupted from his throat, a concentrated wave of energy that vibrated with an unnatural frequency. The wraith, its internal mechanisms momentarily disrupted, spasmed, its phase-shifting ability faltering. Before it could recover, Kavarna's squad moved in, their blades finding the brief window of vulnerability. Against the endless tide of Necron warriors, the Kroot unveiled a macabre adaptation: the emission of resonant frequencies. During their consumption, these Kroot had absorbed fragments of Necron signal processing and communication technology. Now, some of them could emit focused sonic pulses that disrupted Necron programming. Entire lines of warriors would stutter, their glowing eyes dimming, their movements becoming erratic and sluggish, allowing the Kroot to carve them down with devastating precision. It was an echoing feedback loop, turning the Necron's own silent language against them. Kalarok himself was a terrifying force. He moved with the fluid grace of a ghost, phasing through the Necron lines, his blade, now a crystalline extension of his will, severing command protocols and disabling vital systems. He seemed to perceive the Necron energy networks, sensing their weak points. A phalanx of warriors, protecting a vital conduit, suddenly found their power source severed, their bodies going inert as Kallarok flickered through their ranks, a trail of metallic dust in his wake. The battle raged for hours. The Kallarok kin pack fought with a cold, almost surgical brutality. They were losing kin, many dying gruesome, irreversible deaths as their fragile, Necron-infused forms overloaded or were simply overwhelmed by the sheer numbers of the ancient foe. But for every Kroot that fell, dozens of Necrons were put down, some permanently shattered by the Kroot's uncanny ability to disrupt their reanimation protocols. Slowly, agonizingly, the tide began to turn. Khazar, observing the Kroot's impossible resilience and their unique disruptive abilities, began to pull his forces back. He had not anticipated such a powerful, unforeseen adaptation. The Kroot were an anomaly that defied his logical calculations, a corruption he could not immediately comprehend. He needed to re-evaluate, to adapt his own strategy. The Necrons withdrew, leaving behind a field of deactivated constructs and a TOW outpost saved from annihilation. Starfire Echo was secured. The TOW, battered and shaken, stood amidst the wreckage, staring at their Kroot saviors with a mixture of profound relief and abject horror. The cost of victory was stark and far more profound than mere casualties. The Kroot, though victorious, were irrevocably altered. Their bodies were scarred with metallic wounds that sparked with alien energy. Their eyes glowed with an unsettling emerald light, and the silence of their internal communication was almost deafening to the few TOW who understood the nuance of Xenos interaction. Commander Brightblade, surveying the battlefield, felt a profound chill seep into his core. He had witnessed Kroot self-repairing before his very eyes, phase shifting through solid objects and disrupting enemy technology with their very voices. This was not evolutionary adaptation. This was mutation, corruption, a fundamental shift that defied every known principle of biology and physics. The TOW xenobiologists who had witnessed the battle were in a state of shock, their theories shattered. The Kallarok kinpack had secured a Pyrrhic victory. They had saved the TOW outpost, securing their reputation as invaluable auxiliaries, but they had also unveiled the terrifying truth of their transformation. Their abilities were too alien, too unnatural to be explained away. The whispers and suspicions that had followed them for cycles now solidified into undeniable, horrific fact. Kallarok stood amidst his remaining kin, his own body bearing the marks of countless Necron impacts, his gaze distant and cold. He had saved the Tau, but at what cost to his own people? The internal schism had intensified. Those who clung to their Kroot essence were now openly terrified, while those who had embraced the Necron code viewed the display of power as validation. The line had been crossed. The secret was out, not through deliberate revelation, but through desperate necessity. The Toe now knew. They might not understand the how or the why, but they knew something profoundly wrong had happened to the Kalara kinpack. The future, once uncertain, now presented a stark, terrifying clarity. They were no longer just Kroot auxiliaries. They were an alien variable, a potent threat, and the Tau, ever pragmatic, would eventually have to deal with them. The victory was a death knell, echoing the price of forbidden knowledge and the grim, irreversible choices made in the name of survival. The Pyrrhic victory at Starfire Echo was not just a turning point in the Kalarok kinpack's war against Khazar, but also in their desperate attempt to conceal their true nature from the Tau. With the revelation of their impossible abilities, Kalarok knew their time of deception was drawing to a close. But the Necron code, now deeply interwoven with his very being, began to stir with an ancient, irresistible compulsion. It urged him, and by extension his most integrated kin, to delve deeper, not just into the planet's physical depths, but into the forgotten history etched within the very Necron constructs they consumed. Driven by this strange, almost telepathic imperative, Kalarok led a trusted cadre, including the increasingly cold and analytical Jaharok and Kavarna, to the oldest, most extensive sections of the Necron tomb world. They bypassed Khazar's reactivated defense systems with a chilling familiarity, their Necron-infused senses allowing them to perceive subtle energy fluxes, dormant traps, and hidden passages that would be invisible to any other organic life form. The very architecture of the tomb seemed to welcome them, a dark, silent invitation to unravel its ancient secrets. Deep within a chamber of unimaginable antiquity, beneath layers of crystalline rock and ions of solidified dust, they discovered a series of vast, intricate obelisks. These were not mere decorative pillars. They were massive data repositories, fractured memory shards of the Necronter, designed to record and preserve their history for eternity. Many were damaged, shattered by ancient conflicts or millennia of geological stress, but some remained largely intact, pulsating with faint internal light. The Kroot approached cautiously. Unlike the metallic remains of warriors and constructs, these obelisks were not meant for consumption. They pulsed with a raw, informational energy. As Kellerach reached out, his metallic sheened hand brushing against the cold, smooth surface of one of the smaller, intact obelisks, he felt a profound jolt. It wasn't physical pain, but a sudden, overwhelming influx of pure data directly into his Necron-enhanced neural network. Images, concepts, and ancient memories flooded his mind, overwhelming his Kroot consciousness. He saw glimpses of a dying star, a vast, technologically advanced empire of organic beings. The Necronter. He witnessed their despair as their sun ravaged them with radiation, their desperate plea to the alien, godlike Satan, beings of pure energy from beyond the veil of reality. He saw the bargain, the promises of immortality and power, and the terrifying, irreversible act of biotransference, the shedding of flesh for cold, perfect metal, the imprisonment of their souls within unfeeling machines. The vision expanded. He witnessed the war in heaven, a conflict of unimaginable scale between the Necrons and the Old Ones, a war that tore the galaxy apart. He saw the betrayal of the Satan, the enslavers who fed on the very life force of the Necrons, transforming them into soulless slaves. He saw the Necrons' ultimate rebellion, the shattering of their enslavers, and the subsequent slumber, a vast, self-imposed hibernation to weather the galactic storms and await the return of their glory. Kellerach recoiled, gasping, the data overload momentarily incapacitating him. His quills flared wildly, his body trembling. He felt a profound, soul-shattering horror. He had not merely been consuming physical components. He had been ingesting echoes of consciousness, fragments of memory, slivers of a tragic, ancient history. The sterile, unfeeling logic that had been subtly guiding his decisions was not merely an enhancement. It was an imprint of a fallen empire, a legacy of a species that had traded its soul for immortality. Jaharach and Kavarna, their own Necron-integrated minds, far more receptive and less resistant to the pure data stream, approached the obelisks next. They touched the surfaces, and their eyes glowed with an even fiercer emerald light. Their mental presence within the Kroot collective became a conduit for this ancient information, broadcasting the terrifying truths to their kin. Many Kroot, overwhelmed by the sheer volume of alien data, collapsed, their minds reeling from the visions of sterile metal, of the cold logic of oblivion, of the betrayal of flesh. Through the shared psychic link, Calorok pieced together the fragments of what his kin were perceiving. They understood the scale of the Necronter's tragedy, the desperate gamble for survival that had resulted in eternal damnation. They understood the cold, logical imperative that drove the Necrons to reclaim their lost empire, to purge the galaxy of all organic life, to restore the order they believed was their birthright. And in that understanding, Calorok and his most altered kin saw a chilling reflection of their own path. They, too, in their desperate quest for survival and adaptation, had begun to shed their organic identity. They, too, were trading their warmth and their primal essence for the cold, unyielding resilience of metal. They saw the end state, the sterile, eternal prison they had unknowingly begun to replicate within their own evolving forms. The metallic plates forming beneath their skin, the crystalline structures replacing their bones, the increasing emotional detachment. It was all a macabre echo of the Necronter's fall. The whispers in their collective consciousness, once a vague hum, now became a chorus of ancient voices, silent, logical, and filled with an unfathomable sorrow for a lost organic existence. It was a warning, a glimpse into the future they were carving for themselves. The Necrons were not just an enemy, they were a mirror, reflecting the grim irony of their choices. This newfound, terrifying knowledge changed everything. The internal schism within the kin pack intensified, but with a new, urgent focus. Elder Zakar, horrified by the visions transmitted by Calorok, rallied the traditionalist Kroot with renewed fervor. "This is our doom," he shrieked, his voice filled with despair. "We become them. We become the very death we consume." But for Calorok, Jaharok, and Kavarna, the knowledge also brought a chilling clarity. They understood the source of their power, the danger, and the immense potential. They were becoming something more than Kroot, something that could rival the Necrons in their own game. The goal was no longer just survival. It was control. Control over their own evolution. Control over the Necron code that now coursed through their veins. The Necron data obelisks had imparted not just history, but also fragments of Necron biomorphic data, schematics for their intricate self-repair systems, principles of their phase technology. It was a weapon and a warning simultaneously. Calorok now understood that Khazar's motivation was not just to destroy them, but to reclaim what they had assimilated, to restore the purity of his dynasty's legacy. The Kroot were not just trespassers. They were walking, breathing affronts to Necron perfection. The grim, cold clarity of the Necron history settled heavily upon Kalarok. He now understood the true nature of the universe's grim, dark reality. There was no true salvation, only different forms of damnation. The Tau's greater good was a naive dream. The Kroot's ancestral path, while vibrant, seemed insufficient against the ancient evils. And the Necron path was eternal, sterile imprisonment. The Kalarok Kinpak had uncovered a truth so profound and horrifying that it overshadowed even the immediate threat of the Tau inspection. They had looked into the abyss of the Necronter's past, and it had reflected a chilling image of their own potential future. The whispers of the past were no longer just echoes. They were a direct, horrifying premonition. The path they had chosen, initially for survival, now revealed itself as a desperate, terrifying tightrope walk over the precipice of non-existence. The grim revelations from the Necron data obelisks had plunged the Kalarok Kinpak into a deeper existential crisis. But amidst the despair and burgeoning horror, a flicker of something new began to manifest. It was a cold, calculating hope, born not of primal instinct, but of the very Necron logic now interwoven with their beings. The data obelisks had imparted not just history, but also fragments of Necron biomorphic schematics, arcane principles of their technology, and the subtle intricacies of their reanimation protocols. It was Jaharok, ever the analytical mind, whose altered neural network processed these complex data fragments most effectively. During a period of intense consumption and meditation amongst the remnants of a shattered Necron processing facility, he discovered a subtle resonance. His enhanced senses, attuned to the Necron energy networks, perceived a unique signature emanating from a particularly large, damaged construct, a vast, intricate machine that had once served as a central reconfiguration matrix for Necron bodies. It was a factory of flesh-turned metal, a mechanism designed to repair, reintegrate, and even modify the Necron tire's metallic forms. The matrix was colossal, a spiderweb of arcane conduits and inert crystalline nodes, deeply buried beneath layers of millennia-old rock. Its outer shell was heavily damaged, its primary power conduits severed by some ancient, catastrophic impact. But its core, deep within, still pulsed with a faint, residual energy, a dormant promise of untold power. Jaharok, guided by the Necron code within him, realized its purpose. This machine was designed to precisely control the transformation and evolution of Necron forms. If they could reactivate it, understand its principles. Perhaps they could harness its power to control their own evolution. To modulate the incoming Necron gene code, to steer it away from complete assimilation, to prevent the absolute erasure of their Kroot identity. It was a desperate gamble, a knife-edge walk between salvation and ultimate corruption. He brought his findings to Kellarok. "Shaper," Jaharok transmitted, his voice an unsettling blend of Kroot guttural and metallic resonance. "The obelisks have revealed not just our doom, but a potential path to dominion over it. This matrix, it is the key. It can rewrite the genetic code, manipulate the essence of forms." Kellarok, his own mind still reeling from the visions of Necron-ter damnation, felt a flicker of the primal Kroot spark reignite within him. Control. The Kroot had always adapted, always sought to control their evolution. This was simply a new, terrifyingly advanced means to that end. But the sheer audacity of the idea, the blasphemy of attempting to hijack Necron technology for Kroot purposes, was staggering. It is a weapon that can save us or destroy us utterly, Kellarok concluded, his gaze fixed on the holographic schematics Jaharok projected. To master it, we must consume its essence, its knowledge. The kin pack embarked on their most dangerous consumption yet. They scavenged the damaged components of the reconfiguration matrix, focusing on the control mechanisms, the data-rich processors, the very blueprints of its transformative power. The process was excruciating. The Necron code, far more concentrated and intricate in these components, flooded their systems with raw, unfiltered data. Some Kroot collapsed into temporary catatonia, their minds unable to process the sheer complexity. Others suffered debilitating seizures, their bodies spasming as the alien technology attempted to rewrite their organic forms with brutal efficiency. But for Kellarok, Jaharok, and Kavarna, the consumption yielded unprecedented results. They gained a deeper, almost intuitive understanding of Necron technology. Kellarok felt the internal mechanisms of his own body click into place with new, logical precision. He could sense the energy flows within his transformed organs, the crystalline lattice of his bones. He could, with extreme focus, even exert a rudimentary level of control over his nascent self-repair, willing minor wounds to close faster, realigning splintered bone fragments with a thought. Jaharok, processing the raw data streams from the matrix, began to devise theoretical applications. He hypothesized that by channeling the energy from the matrix through carefully selected Necron components, they could create a focused biotransference field, a localized pulse that could either accelerate or decelerate the integration of specific Necron gene code within their bodies. It was a precarious process, requiring absolute precision, but it offered the tantalizing possibility of genetic modulation. The first attempts were fraught with peril. Using salvaged Necron power cells and rudimentary Kroot-modified technology, they managed to activate a small subcomponent of the matrix. The resulting energy field was unstable, causing violent, uncontrollable mutations in the test subjects. Captive, low-grade Xylos prime fauna that had somehow survived in deep geothermal vents. Some animals were instantly rendered into shimmering metallic dust. Others mutated into grotesque, unstable hybrids of flesh and necrodermis, collapsing into an inert pile of alien matter. Elder Zakar, witnessing these horrifying experiments, was appalled. "This is madness, Shaper," he bellowed, his fear turning to open defiance. "You seek to become a god of metal, to usurp the natural order. This is heresy to the great sphere." He pleaded with Kellerock to abandon this path, to try to purge the Necron essence, to return to their primal Kroot roots. But Kellerock, his mind now cold and calculating, saw only the logical imperative. This was the only way. "The Great Sphere demands adaptation, Elder," he replied, his voice devoid of emotion. "This is our adaptation, to master the very force that seeks to consume us." He understood that Zachar's path was one of slow, inevitable extinction. The galaxy was too grim, too dangerous for pure Kroot. Through painstaking trial and error, Jaharak refined the process. He discovered that specific patterns of consumption, combined with precise energy calibration from the reconfigured matrix, could selectively enhance or suppress certain Necron traits. They found that by consuming the remnants of Citan shards, minute fragments of the shattered star gods that powered some Necron constructs, they could, in theory, harness a raw, unfathomable power, but at the immense risk of mental obliteration. The glimmer of hope was not a beacon of light, but a Kotka hard choice. They could attempt to use the matrix to selectively prune the more destructive Necron traits, such as the complete emotional detachment and the physiological rejection of organic sustenance, while retaining the resilience, the phase shifting, and the heightened intellect. It would be a constant, perilous balancing act, requiring a perpetual, controlled intake of Necron remnants alongside organic biomass. They would forever be walking a genetic tightrope. Kellerock understood the profound irony. To save their Kroot identity, they had to become even more Necron. to truly control their evolution, they had to embrace the very technology that had enslaved the Necrontyr. The reconfiguration matrix was not a salvation in the traditional sense, but a tool for precise, self-directed corruption, a means to define the exact parameters of their monstrosity. The discovery of the reconfiguration matrix offered a way forward, a desperate, unstable path out of the encroaching oblivion. It gave Calorok a new objective, a new burden. He was no longer just the shaper of his kin pack. He was the nascent architect of a new species, a hybrid being caught between two ancient, warring forces, wielding the forbidden tools of one to preserve the essence of the other. The hope was grim, tinged with the metallic taste of cosmic tragedy. But it was hope, nonetheless, a flickering flame in the vast, unforgiving darkness of the 41st millennium. The Calorok kinpack now found itself embroiled in a long war, a brutal, multi-front conflict that demanded every ounce of their newfound, terrifying resilience. The battle for Xylos Prime had escalated from skirmishes into a full-blown war, fought in the deep, echoing chasms of the tomb world and across the barren, shattered surface. Simultaneously, the relentless scrutiny of the Tau ethereal investigative team pressed in from above, a shadow of suspicion growing ever darker. And within their own ranks, the internal struggle for identity intensified, a silent war for the very soul of the Kroot. Khazar, the technomancer, infuriated by the Kroot's unexpected resilience and their uncanny ability to disrupt his forces at Starfire Echo, had initiated a full-scale awakening protocol across Xylos Prime. More Necron legions stirred from their slumber, their glowing green eyes illuminating the ancient tunnels. Necron destroyers, their forms optimized for pure annihilation, now scourged the surface, their Gauss weaponry tearing through anything that dared to move. Heavy Necron constructs, like the towering monoliths and the agile doom scythes, began to rise from subterranean hangars, casting long, menacing shadows across the desolate landscape. The Calorok kinpack, now largely confined to the deeper sections of the tomb world, fought a guerrilla war against this awakened empire. They leveraged their intimate knowledge of the Necron architecture, their phase-shifting abilities, and their precise targeting to strike at vulnerable conduits, to disable reanimation protocols, and to assassinate key Necron command units. It was a war of attrition, with the Kroot constantly outnumbered, but possessed of an intelligence and adaptability that baffled even the ancient Necrons. During one such desperate engagement, a contingent of Necron-flayed ones, their metal bodies draped in the flayed skin of their victims, ambushed a Kroot scouting party. These deranged Necrons, driven by an unholy hunger for flesh, were a horrifying reflection of the Kroot's own dietary habits. The battle was gruesome, a visceral clash of organic adaptation and metallic horror. Kavarna, leading the Kroot, found his phase-shifting abilities pushed to their absolute limits, flickering in and out of reality as he dodged the flayed one's razor-sharp claws. He retaliated with precision, severing the nerve conduits that animated the gruesome constructs, but the psychological toll was immense. The flayed ones were a grim warning, a twisted parody of Kroot evolution. Meanwhile, the Tau investigative team, led by a stern water-caste diplomat named Antile and advised by Dr. McCann, closed in on the Kroot's hidden activities. The evidence was overwhelming. Sensor logs from Starfire Echo confirmed the Kroot's impossible feats. Orbital scans, now focused on Kroot patrol routes, detected faint, rhythmic energy pulses deep within the planet's crust, signals that precisely matched the peculiar signatures emanating from the Kroot themselves. Dr. McCann's continued research, now augmented by advanced Tau forensic technology, revealed the pervasive presence of non-organic, crystalline structures in every Kroot biological sample. Antile, a master of interrogation, confronted Kellerock directly. "Shaper," she began, her voice calm but laced with an undeniable steel. "The data is irrefutable. Your kin pack has undergone an evolutionary acceleration far beyond any natural process. We detect extraneous energy signatures, non-organic material integrated at a cellular level, and abilities that defy the known laws of biology. You have been withholding information from the Ethereal Council." Kellerock, his face a mask of cold composure, offered prefabricated responses, carefully crafted to obscure the truth while still acknowledging the obvious. The unique geobiological composition of Xylos Prime, ethereal. A symbiotic integration with dormant, microcrystalline life forms. Our adaptability is simply proving unprecedented. He showed them carefully selected samples of innocuous crystalline dust, mined from superficial layers of the planet, which, while indeed present, were merely a cover for the true Necron-derived alterations. But Antile was not easily fooled. She presented holographic projections of Necron remnants, pieces of the very constructs Kellerock's kin had been consuming. "These were found near your designated patrol routes, Shaper," she stated, her eyes narrowed. "Fragments of a previously unknown Xenos civilization. You claim your diet is from indigenous fauna, yet these are metal." Kellerock felt a cold sweat on his metallic-sheened skin. The trap was closing. He had to maintain the deception, to avoid outright hostilities. But the truth was too vast to hide forever. He defaulted to a well-rehearsed narrative of resource scarcity and unforeseen genetic assimilation. Necessity, ethereal. We consumed what was available. Our biology proved uniquely receptive to these mineral constructs. It was a desperate bluff, a half-truth that twisted the reality into something vaguely plausible within the Tao understanding of Kroot biology. To add to the complexity, the reconfiguration matrix, their glimmer of hope, was proving incredibly difficult to control. Jaharak and Kavarna worked tirelessly, guided by Kalarok, attempting to fine-tune its energy output and genetic modulation. They managed to suppress some of the more deleterious Necron traits, preventing the complete erosion of emotion in some of the younger Kroot, slowing the rejection of organic biomass. But it was a fragile, unstable process. Each calibration required further consumption of Necron components, deepening their reliance on the forbidden diet. Elder Zekar and his traditionalist faction, meanwhile, saw their worst fears realized. They were being forced to become more Necron, to avoid becoming entirely Necron. They watched in horror as their kinmates underwent controlled, precise transformations, their forms becoming sharper, more angular, their internal structures visibly reinforced with metallic plating. The reconfiguration matrix, while offering a semblance of control, was still pushing them further from their Kroot heritage, albeit on a defined, controlled trajectory. The Kinpack was a microcosm of the Long War, battling not just external enemies, but internal contradictions. They fought Khazar to survive, but every Necron they put down was a potential source of genetic material, deepening their corruption. They deceived the Tau to maintain their alliance, but every lie pushed them closer to exposure and potential extermination. They fought themselves, attempting to control their own evolution, to carve out a new path between the abyss of Necron enslavement and the oblivion of pure Kroot extinction. Kalarok walked a constant tightrope, his mind a whirlwind of tactical calculations against Khazar, diplomatic maneuvering against Aun Tile, and internal genetic calibrations for his own kin. He felt the cold, logical imperative of the Necron code urging him towards ruthless efficiency, whispering of the inevitable need to discard the weakness of organic life. But in his heart, a faint, stubborn spark of Kroot warmth persisted, a memory of the green world of Peck, of the shared hunt, of the vibrant, messy, beautiful chaos of life. He was a living paradox, a creature of flesh and metal, reason and instinct, burdened by the terrible choices he had made, fighting a long war with no clear end, only ever-increasing costs. The burden of leadership had twisted Kalarok into a creature of grim necessity, a living bridge between two utterly alien biologies, wrestling for control of his own soul even as he guided his kin through an existential crisis. He was no longer merely a Kroot shaper. He was an anomaly, a being shaped by forbidden knowledge and the cold, unfeeling logic of the Necron. His personal journey became a stark reflection of his pack's terrifying transformation, a testament to the grim irony of survival in the 41st millennium. Physically, Kalarok was almost unrecognizable from the Kroot who first landed on Xylos Prime. His quills, once a mottled green, were now stiff, almost metallic, with a faint, iridescent shimmer that caught the light in sterile flashes. His skin, particularly around his joints and skull, had hardened into plates of interwoven chitin and necrodermis, like alloys, capable of deflecting direct hits from low-caliber energy weapons. His eyes, once deep pools of black, now glowed with a faint emerald luminescence, a subtle, constant reminder of the alien consciousness seeping into his being. Internally, his bones were crystalline lattices, his muscles threaded with metallic filaments, his blood, still a thick, green ichor, now contained microscopic, self-repairing nanites derived from Necron technology. But the most profound changes were within his mind. The cold logic of the Necron code was a constant presence, a whispering current beneath his conscious thoughts. It urged him towards efficiency, towards ruthless pragmatism, towards the eradication of inefficient, organic emotions. He found himself analyzing situations with chilling detachment, calculating probabilities, and predicting outcomes with unnerving accuracy. The warmth of Kroot camaraderie, the primal joy of the hunt, the shared emotional resonance of his kin. These feelings became muted, distant, like echoes from a fading dream. His dreams, once vibrant tapestries of ancestral hunts and verdant landscapes, were now dominated by stark, geometric forms, by the silent march of metallic legions, by the cold, unblinking gaze of countless green eyes. He saw glimpses of the war in heaven, not as a historical event, but as a lived experience, feeling the despair of the Necrontyre, the betrayal of the Catan, the emptiness of biotransference. He understood the profound tragedy of the Necron fall, the sterile immortality they had purchased at the cost of their souls, and he felt the insidious pull of that same cold logic tempting him with the promise of eternal, unfeeling order. Yet a stubborn ember of his Kroot self persisted. It was the memory of Peck, of the vibrant life of his homeworld, of the unyielding drive to adapt and live, not merely exist. It was the faint, lingering warmth of his connection to Elder Zakar, despite their ideological rift. He saw the struggling, organic forms of his kin still clinging to their Kroot instincts, even as their bodies transformed. And a faint, almost forgotten empathy stirred within him. He was becoming a monster, he knew. But he was still his monster, one that chose its own path, however twisted. This internal battle manifested in Kellerach's leadership. He was outwardly calm, decisive, and terrifyingly effective. His tactical brilliance against Khazar's Necrons was unmatched, his diplomatic evasions with Ontile masterful. But beneath the surface, he was constantly fighting. He would issue an order of brutal efficiency, calculated to maximize Kroot survival at a high cost, then later retreat to the solitude of his chamber, contemplating the morality of his choices, feeling the ghost of a primal Kroot scream trapped within his metallic-laced throat. He had moments of profound clarity, moments when he fully embraced the alien logic. He understood why the Necrons sought to purge all organic life. It was an imperfection, a chaotic element in a universe that could be made orderly. He could see the elegance in the Necron form, the perfection of their self-repair. He could even envision a future where the Kroot discarded their fragile flesh entirely, becoming beings of pure, indestructible energy. But then, a memory would surface, the scent of rain on Peck, the warmth of a freshly killed prey, the raucous, joyful chittering of his kin celebrating a successful hunt, and the cold, logical perfection would seem like a barren wasteland, an eternity of loneliness. He was a bridge, constantly being stretched, constantly threatened with tearing apart. His relationship with Elder Zashar became a source of both agony and a faint anchor to his past. Zachar openly condemned Kellerach's path, viewing it as a betrayal of their very species. "You lead us to oblivion, Shaper," Zachar would rasp, his quills agitated. "To become like the empty dead. Where is the joy? Where is the hunger for true life?" Kellerach would meet his elder's gaze with his glowing emerald eyes, a profound sadness stirring within his metal-threaded heart. "The galaxy does not care for joy, Elder," he would reply, his voice flat. "It cares for survival. And this is the only path left to us however grim. He knew Zakar was right in principle, but the pragmatism of the Necron-infused mind told him that pure Kroot instinct alone would lead to their extinction. The future was too grim, too monstrous to cling to old ideals. The internal burden weighed heavily. He was becoming a solitary figure, even among his kin. Those who embraced the Necron path revered him as a visionary, a shaper who dared to push the boundaries of evolution. Those who clung to the old ways looked at him with a mixture of fear, sorrow, and disgust. He was both a savior and a damned soul, leading his kin into a future that was simultaneously glorious and horrifying. Kalarak understood that his journey was not just his own, but the very essence of the Kalarak Kinpack's legacy. He had initiated their transformation, guided their consumption, and now he bore the weight of their collective soul. He was the prototype of a new, terrifying breed, a creature of grim necessity, forever walking the razor's edge between the vibrant chaos of life and the sterile perfection of death. His personal struggle was the battle for their species' identity, a hero's burden in a universe that offered only shades of gray and an eternity of war. The pressure from all sides reached a terrifying crescendo. Commander Brightblade, having received increasingly damning reports from Ontile and Dr. McCon, made a difficult but inevitable decision. The Kalarak Kinpack, once celebrated auxiliaries, were now deemed an unacceptable risk to the greater good. Their anomalous abilities, their deceptive secrecy, and the irrefutable evidence of their non-organic cellular integration painted a picture of uncontrolled mutation, a potential rogue element that could not be tolerated. An extermination order, cloaked in diplomatic niceties as a relocation and deep space survey mission, was drafted, sanctioned by the Ethereal Council. Simultaneously, Khazar the Technomancer launched his most devastating assault yet. He had carefully observed the Kroot, studied their unique adaptations, and tailored his forces to counter them. His target, the Kroot's primary hidden consumption site, which was also, crucially, the location of the reconfiguration matrix, the very device Kalarak hoped would save his kin. Khazar had deduced its purpose and recognized its potential to further corrupt what he considered Necron purity. He would not allow it to fall into their blasphemous hands. The Kalarak Kinpack found itself caught in an impossible vice. From above, Tau forces were preparing to descend, their stealth ship and attack craft forming a silent, deadly cordon around Xylos Prime. From below, Khazar's legions rose, a tide of green-eyed horror intent on their annihilation. The darkest hour had arrived. Kalarak, his senses heightened by the Necron code within him, felt the twin threats simultaneously. The hum of the Necron awakening was a roar in his mind, and the silent, cold approach of the Tau fleet was an ache behind his glowing eyes. He knew. This was the end, one way or another. He gathered his kin in the central chamber of the reconfiguration matrix. Elder Zakar and his traditionalists stood apart, their faces grim, their quills agitated. Jaharak and Kavarna, along with the most Necron-integrated Kroot, stood vigilant, their eyes glowing with an emerald intensity, ready for battle. "The Tau come," Kalarak transmitted to the collective, his voice flat, but resonating with an undercurrent of metallic power. "They deem us an anomaly. They will cleanse us." He then turned to the looming, reactivated form of the reconfiguration matrix. Khazar comes too. He seeks to reclaim what we have taken, to destroy this machine. The Necron attack struck first. The ground shuddered as massive tomb stalkers, multi-limbed constructs of living metal, burst through the bedrock, their particle shredders blasting apart the Kroot's makeshift defenses. Behind them, phalanxes of Necron warriors poured into the chambers, their Gauss flares opening fire, incinerating Kroot warriors who were too slow or too organic to adapt. Canoptech wraiths phased through walls, their claws tearing through the Kroot ranks, targeting their most vital organs. The Kalarak kinpack fought with a ferocity born of desperation. Jaharak, now almost Zarsu machine than Kroot, met a tomb stalker head-on, his body shimmering with an unstable phase shift, drawing its fire while Kavarna led a squad in a flanking maneuver, targeting its synaptic control nodes with precision shots. Their enhanced resilience and self-repair capabilities were pushed beyond their limits. Wounds that would have been instantly fatal for lesser Kroot merely slowed them, as metallic filaments and crystalline structures visibly knitted themselves back together. But the Necrons were overwhelming. Khazar himself, a gleaming, skeletal figure wreathed in crackling green energy, phased into the chamber. He surveyed the battle with cold satisfaction, his gaze immediately drawn to the reconfiguration matrix. "Abominations," he hissed, his voice a dry, rasping whisper that echoed in the Kroot's minds. "You have defiled the purity of our legacy. This machine will not fall into your corrupted hands." Suddenly, the Tau ships initiated their atmospheric descent. Drop ships carrying Firecast teams, accompanied by heavily armored crisis suits, began to breach the upper levels of the tomb world. Their rail rifles and burst cannons tearing through the Necron constructs near the surface. The Tau, confused by the unexpected Necron presence, initially engaged the closest threats, unaware of the Kroot's location or the true nature of the battle raging below. It was a chaotic, three-way war, each faction fighting for its own survival and objectives. Kalarok, caught in a crossfire of Gauss fire and Tau pulse blasts, knew their situation was untenable. He watched as Elder Zachar, rallying his traditionalist Kroot, fought with a primal fury, but his organic form was no match for the Necron onslaught. Zachar crumpled, his body riddled with Gauss burns, as a Necron warrior targeted him, his eyes glazing over, the last flicker of pure Kroot essence fading from his vision. His death, a consequence of clinging to the old ways, struck Kalarok with a profound, cold grief. Khazar, meanwhile, had begun to systematically dismantle the reconfiguration matrix, his mechanical tendrils weaving through its arcane components, intending to overload its core and utterly destroy it. The energy emanating from the cryptech was immense, his focus absolute. Kalarok understood. The Matrix was their only hope for directed evolution, for retaining a semblance of Kroot identity. If Khazar destroyed it, they would either revert to their fragile organic forms and be annihilated, or be fully subsumed by the Necron code, losing their minds entirely. And the Toe were closing in, their extermination order moments away from execution. This was their darkest hour. Their numbers were dwindling rapidly, caught between the remorseless efficiency of the Necrons and the righteous fury of the Tau. Kalarok felt the cold logic of the Necron within him, screaming for survival, for power, for control. But the last, dying embers of his Kroot soul screamed for something else, for a choice, for a legacy, for an end that was not merely consumption or annihilation, but an act of will. He had to make a sacrifice, one that would redefine the Kalarok kinpack forever. The central chamber of the reconfiguration matrix pulsed with a sickening, unstable light, a swirling maelstrom of raw Necron energy and Kroot biomatter. Khazar, the technomancer, wreathed in crackling green lightning, systematically tore at the machine's core, intent on obliterating the blasphemous device. Necron warriors poured into the chamber, their Gauss flares spitting death, driving the remaining Kalarok kinpack into a desperate, dwindling circle around their shaper. Above, the Tau forces, now having breached the deepest levels, unleashed concentrated volleys of fire, their weapons tearing through both Kroot and Necron with indiscriminate fury, perceiving both as hostile Xenos. Kalarok stood at the epicenter of this chaos, his body sparking with raw, unstable energy. The Necron code within him screamed conflicting imperatives: fight flee, absorb, destroy. But overriding all of it was a single, chilling clarity, born of the dying embers of his Kroot soul and the cold, pragmatic logic he had so deeply assimilated. There was no escape. The Kallarok kinpack, as it was, could not survive. The Tau would purge them. Khazar would reclaim them. Their hybrid existence was a contradiction the galaxy could not tolerate. But Kallarok, the ultimate shaper, the master of evolution, understood that even in annihilation, there could be a final, deliberate act of genesis. He gazed at the glowing heart of the reconfiguration matrix, then at Khazar, and finally at the last surviving remnants of his kin. Jaharok and Kavarna, their forms now almost fully metallic, fought with grim determination, their eyes burning with emerald fire. But they were losing. Rapidly, he made his choice. Jaharok, Kavarna. Kallarok's voice rang out, no longer Kroot, no longer truly organic, but a resonant, metallic command that cut through the dun of battle. Withdraw. Take what kin remain. Scatter into the void. Do not look back. Jaharok, his face a mask of conflict, hesitated. Shaper, the Matrix, your plan. The plan changes, Kallarok roared, a burst of green energy erupting from his outstretched hand, momentarily staggering Khazar. This is the final evolution, the ultimate assimilation. With a decisive, terrifying resolve, Kallarok turned and hurled himself at the reconfiguration matrix. He was no longer trying to control it, but to become it. He pressed his metal-hardened hands against its shimmering core, channeling the immense, raw Necron energy that coursed through his transformed body directly into the machine. The matrix shrieked, its power surging, overloading, unable to contain the hybrid energy being pumped into it. Khazar, witnessing Kallarok's suicidal act, paused, his cold logic momentarily baffled by the Kroot's insane defiance. "What madness is this?" he hissed, abandoning his destruction to observe this unprecedented phenomenon. As Kallarok poured his essence, his Necron-infused Kroot biology, into the matrix, he simultaneously reached out with his psychic link, broadcasting a final, urgent command to his surviving kin. Consume, absorb. Take this final gift. Scatter, survive, remake yourselves. He wasn't simply overloading the matrix. He was using it as a conduit for a final, catastrophic genetic transfer, imprinting his own unique hybrid code onto his remaining kin, pushing them towards a forced, ultimate mutation. Jaharok and Kavarna, understanding the dire imperative, gathered the few Kroot capable of movement. They saw Kellerach's body, already half merged with the machine, shimmering with an unbearable light, his quills rigid as steel wires. With a final, shared mental image of Kellerach's grim, resolute face, they turned and fled into a tertiary tunnel, their forms flickering with uncontrolled phase shifts, drawing the remnants of the kin pack with them. Khazar, enraged by Kellerach's defiance, launched a full assault on the now merging Kroot matrix entity. His tendrils lashed out, unleashing torrents of destructive energy. But Kellerach, his body almost entirely consumed by the machine, retaliated with a terrifying primal scream that was simultaneously Kroot rage and Necron power. A burst of raw, uncontrolled energy erupted from the matrix, not of Gauss or particle, but of pure, destructive, biomechanical force. The very air in the chamber ripped apart. The ground fractured. Kellerach, in his final act of will, focused the overloading matrix's energy, directing it not just outward, but inward, drawing Khazar and his immediate Necron guard into the heart of the collapsing core. The cryptech shrieked, a sound of pure data corruption, as he found his own perfected form being drawn into the vortex of raw, uncontained energy, his necrodermis dissolving, his systems overloading. For Pesh, for the kin! Kellerach's final, fading thought pulsed through the collective, a ghost of his Kroot past. With a blinding flash of emerald light and a concussive roar that tore through the bedrock of Xylos Prime, the reconfiguration matrix, Kellerach, and Khazar vanished in a singularity of raw, uncontained energy. The very core of the Necron tomb construct imploded, drawing down tons of rock and soil, collapsing into a void of nothingness. The massive tremor rippled across the planet, shaking the tow ships in orbit and sending shock waves through the entire system. The tow ground forces, caught in the aftershocks, scrambled to withdraw, baffled by the sudden, catastrophic implosion. Their sensors registered a massive energy spike, then absolute void where the Necron stronghold had been. The Kroot, their allies, were gone. The Necrons, their mysterious enemy, were gone. Xylos Prime, once a barren world ripe for expansion, was now a cratered scar, its internal structure irrevocably destabilized, a monument to a battle they barely understood. The surviving Kellerach kin pack, shattered and traumatized, emerged from the collapsing tunnels in scattered groups, their bodies now irrevocably altered by Kellerach's final, desperate genetic transfer. They looked back at the gaping maw where the tomb world had been, feeling the profound absence of their shaper, the lingering echo of his sacrifice. They were alive, but utterly, terrifyingly changed. Salvation had come at the ultimate price, a grim and irreversible rebirth. The aftermath of Xylos Prime's implosion was a tableau of cosmic confusion and profound loss. For the Tau Empire, the sudden, devastating collapse of a world they had been in the process of pacifying was a baffling strategic setback. Their orbital sensors registered a gravitational anomaly where the central Necron complex had been, a vast, swirling void of compressed matter and residual energy. The Necron threat was nullified, Xylos Prime utterly ruined, but the how and why remained shrouded in a thick fog of unanswered questions. Commander Brightblade, leading the bewildered Tau forces, could only issue a somber report to the Ethereal Council. The Kallarok Kinpak, along with the unknown Xenos entity they had been shooting, had been lost in action during a catastrophic implosion of the planet's core. He spoke of the Kroot's unflinching bravery and ultimate sacrifice for the greater good, officially bestowing upon them the mantle of heroes. Privately, however, the questions gnawed at him. The sheer scale of the energy release, the inexplicable nature of the implosion, and the Kroot's impossible abilities he had witnessed at Starfire Echo, these facts refused to align with any logical explanation. Dr. McCann and Ontile, though relieved the Necron threat was gone, remained deeply disturbed. Their forensic teams recovered shattered Tau equipment from the collapsed sections, but found no discernible trace of the Kroot or the powerful Necron cryptech. The evidence was simply Guan, consumed by the implosion. Their theories about the Kroot's rapid, unnatural evolution and the hints of ancient, forbidden technology remained unconfirmed, locked away in classified reports that dared not challenge the Ethereal's narrative of heroic sacrifice. The Tau, ever pragmatic, chose to close the file, satisfied that the threat, whatever its true nature, had been contained. But the Kallarok Kinpak was not lost. They were scattered, fragmented, and fundamentally transformed. Jaharok and Kavarna, leading the largest surviving groups, steered their damaged Kroot vessels, salvaged and hastily repaired Tau transports, away from Xylos Prime, their minds reeling from Kallarok's final, desperate genetic transfer. The sacrifice of Kallarok had been both an act of annihilation and a radical, forced evolution. The reconfiguration matrix, overloaded by Kallarok's essence, had imprinted his unique hybrid gene code onto every surviving Kroot within its psychic and energetic radius. The changes, already profound, became absolute and irreversible. Their forms were now a grim testament to the fusion of organic and inorganic. Metallic bone plates, once subtle, now visibly extruded from their hides, forming seamless layers of natural armor. Their quills were no longer soft, but hard, metallic filaments, capable of vibrating with a low, dissonant hum. Their eyes burned with a constant emerald light, reflecting the cold, calculating intelligence that now permeated their minds. Their Kroot facial structures had become more angular, almost segmented, their jaws capable of an unnerving, precise gnawing through even dense alloys. Internally, they were even more alien. Their nervous systems were augmented with Necron-derived synaptic relays, allowing for instantaneous thought and reaction. Their blood, while still green, now pulsed with microscopic nanites, constantly repairing minor damage, purifying toxins, and regulating their metabolism with chilling efficiency. They no longer relied heavily on organic sustenance. A few carefully selected biocomponents were enough to keep them vital. Their primary fuel now drawn from ambient energy fields and the occasional, targeted consumption of specific metallic compounds. Emotion, that primal, often chaotic driving force of the Kroot, was severely dulled. The exuberant chittering, the joyous bellows of a successful hunt, the communal grieving for the fallen, these were replaced by a cold, analytical understanding. They still communicated, but primarily through a silent, mental link, transmitting complex data packets and precise commands rather than emotional expressions. The warmth of the kin pack had been replaced by the efficiency of a networked collective. Some of the Kroot, particularly those who had clung to Elder Zishar's traditionalist views, struggled with the forced transformation. Their bodies spasmed uncontrollably, rejecting the new, dominant Necron code, their minds overwhelmed by the foreign logic. Many simply shut down, their internal systems collapsing, leaving behind silent, metallic husks that were neither Kroot nor Necron. Those who survived were often irrevocably traumatized, their minds fractured, their forms grotesquely twisted, unable to function in either organic or inorganic society. Jaharok and Kavarna, with grim reluctance, had to leave many of these broken kin behind, understanding that mercy in this new existence was an unaffordable luxury. The survivors were a new breed. They were not fully Necron, for Kalarok's final, defiant act had preserved a core, albeit cold and twisted, of Kroot adaptability and will. But they were certainly no longer pure Kroot. They were a hybrid, an unholy fusion, an abomination in the eyes of the Imperium, a rogue element in the eyes of the Tau, and a grotesque corruption in the eyes of the Necrons, had any survived Ka-Zar's wrath. They were adrift, scattered into the galactic void, haunted by the ghost of Xylos Prime. They carried the grim legacy of their Shaper's sacrifice, the unbearable knowledge of their own monstrous transformation. They had sought survival and found it, but at the cost of their very identity. The Kalarok Kinpak was dead, and in its place, a new, terrifying entity had been born, condemned to wander the stars, forever searching for a place they belonged, a place that no longer existed. Their tale was a stark warning, a grim echo of the choices made in the shadowed corners of the galaxy, where survival demanded one become something utterly inhuman. The Kalarok Kinpak, in its original form, was no more. Its sacrifice on Xylos Prime had been both an ending and a horrifying genesis. The scattered remnants, forged in the crucible of Necron consumption, and tempered by Kalarok's final desperate genetic transfer, emerged into the vast galactic void as a new entity, the steel-skinned kin. They were a living paradox, a testament to the grim irony of survival, forever marked by the forbidden knowledge they had consumed. Their existence was one of perpetual wandering, an endless odyssey across the fringes of the galaxy, ostracized by their own kind, misunderstood and feared by the Tau, and hunted by any remaining Necrons who sensed their blasphemous nature. The steel-skinned kin found no sanctuary. Their forms, now predominantly metallic, their eyes glowing with an emerald luminescence, were a constant reminder of the price they had paid. They were beings of both flesh and necrodermis, of cold logic and suppressed instinct, forever caught between two irreconcilable states of being. Jaharok and Kavarna, now co-shapers, led the scattered fragments of their kin. Their leadership was marked by a chilling efficiency, a pragmatic approach to survival that mirrored Kalarok's final directives. They meticulously maintained their altered biology, using the principles of the reconfiguration matrix, now ingrained within their very cellular structure, to manage their genetic makeup. They consumed judiciously, no longer with the frenzied hunger of traditional Kroot, but with a precise, analytical selection, seeking out rare metallic ores, forgotten Necron remnants, and occasionally highly processed organic biocomponents from other species to maintain a fragile balance. Their legacy was one of forbidden knowledge. Among the Kroot Great Sphere, the tale of the Kalarok Kinpak became a whispered legend, a dark, cautionary tale. They were known as the Metal Eaters, the kin who had strayed too far, corrupted their sacred genetic imperative, and lost their souls to the Great Nothing. Other Kroot packs instinctively recoiled from the steel-skinned kin, sensing the alien coldness within them, the sterile echo of unlife. Attempts by the steel-skinned to reintegrate into Kroot society were met with fear and hostility, often leading to bloody skirmishes as their new, terrifying abilities were unveiled. For the Tau, the Kallarok Kinpack became a footnote in their strategic histories, a tragic casualty of the relentless galactic expansion. Officially, they remained heroes, their sacrifice celebrated in carefully curated propaganda. But behind closed doors, highly classified Tau intelligence reports continued to circulate, detailing Dr. McConn's unsettling findings and Commander Brightblade's lingering unease. The lost Kroot were a dangerous unknown, a potential threat that the Tau secretly monitored, even as they dismissed any active pursuit. The Ethereals, ever concerned with order and control, ensured that the full, horrifying truth of the Kroot's transformation remained buried, a testament to their own short-sightedness and the perils of unbridled auxiliary integration. And for the Necrons, the steel-skinned kin were an affront to existence. Though Khazar and much of his immediate forces had been annihilated with Kallarok, the greater Necron Empire slowly awoke across the galaxy. As they became aware of the peculiar Xenos hybrids with their fragments of Necron biomorphic code, the steel-skinned kin became a priority target, a corruption, a desecration of their sacred lineage that demanded extermination. They were hunted relentlessly, forcing them to adopt extreme measures of stealth and subterfuge, their phase-shifting abilities and enhanced senses becoming crucial for their very survival. The steel-skinned kin lived in the shadows, their existence a constant struggle against a universe that offered them no quarter. They were efficient, deadly, and possessed of a cold, analytical intellect that made them formidable adversaries. They adapted to every threat, not with the vibrant, chaotic evolution of their ancestors, but with a precise, calculated reshaping of their own hybrid biology, drawing upon the forbidden knowledge of the Necrontyr. They were living weapons, their forms a monument to Kallarok's desperate final act, a testament to a survival bought at the cost of their very identity. Their legacy was etched not in glory, but in grim infamy. They were a symbol of the dark irony of the Warhammer 40,000 galaxy. To survive, one must often become something utterly monstrous. The Kalarok Kinpack had sought to protect its Kroot essence, but in doing so had become a chilling echo of the Necrontyr's fall, a sterile and eternal warning that the paths to power are often paved with the souls of the damned. They endured, a testament to Kalarok's ultimate, tragic choice, forever wandering, forever changed, forever lost between life and unlife, a grim, steel-skinned testament to a universe that offered no easy victories, only different forms of damnation.